Approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, approval of the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Jess, all in favor?
Aye.
Ally, anyone from the public on?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, discussion and next steps. Policy 5041, use of private technology devices by students. There.
Okay, so Yonder is coming to the high school, to a high school near you. And yeah, exactly. So we should get all of our pouches by the 25th, no, the Monday, I think it's the 22nd of this month, which will be great. They're sending us all extra large pouches. They have the receding pin, so that pin isn't sticking out, which is great. And because a lot of pins got broken last year too, so that should really, really help. I know Brian's trying to figure out supervision and kiosks, and we're trying to, I think we have the flow of where the kiosks will go as the kids come into the building, even during construction. So got those pieces in place, which is really great. So as we're doing this, now we want to change. On page 1, we have the clarification of what happened with the middle school last year, but we didn't have the high school because they were doing without the pouches. So one proposal, because high school is a little different than middle school, is to have the high school, and certainly you can jump in, Brian, at any point, no cell phone use during the day. I know we talked about lunchtime or study halls or, right, just for consistency. The only issue is some of the classes, a period at a time, may need a mobile kiosk to unlock because of a specific lesson. So when we talked with Yonder about it, they seemed amenable because they're going to give us some extra mobile kiosks that the admins have anyway. So our proposal is, and I'll just pass this out to you, that the request must be approved by an administrator 24 hours in advance, and it's for a specific lesson. It's not all the time, it's not every day. The kiosk doesn't stay in that teacher's room. But we wanted to be able to, thanks.
One more, Michelle.
Oh, I'm sorry. So basically the verbiage would be the same as the middle school, except with that one piece, because sometimes the drone students may need it. Sometimes I know some of our very high level science classes need it. And the graphic design teacher had mentioned that he had a need for it as well. But it's on a limited basis. You have to sign out. The administrator has to approve.
So what were the 3 classes that you
Those were
had?
just some examples. So we know that the drones teacher is going to come ask us periodically, the graphic design, and some of those very high upper level science. Yeah. Now there may be something else, but those are just things that I know were mentioned for specifics
Okay.
that they needed.
And those exceptions dealt with either a specific app that was unavailable anywhere else but on the phone, or had to do with the speed of the camera on the phone versus the speed of the camera on the laptop. So that was
Okay.
because most other things that were brought forward at those meetings as concerns of why people had to have phones with the new laptops or MacBooks that the students are getting, they have more than enough capacity to handle the vast majority of things that were brought forward.
Question I have is, they, in the discussions that we had, the meetings that we had with the high school, it was the guidance department having
Of the QR code.
the QR code. So is
for appointments.
Correct, so have you?
Yep,
Okay,
That's all solved.
Okay, great, great. Anyone else?
Well, I kind of thought that we were going to hear some about how did this go at the middle school? Like, what was the impact on discipline? Was there, because some of the concerns was, okay, kids need to be contacted by their parents. Are they going to be going to the office more? What's the impact on office staff? What are the practical things that come up that could be legitimate reasons that kids need their phones during the day? And then we were going to decide, does this make sense? And then in that, you know, all those things considered to roll this out at the high school. Are there different things at the high school? You know, would we consider letting kids unlock them during lunch or senior privilege or something like that, given the fact that high schoolers are almost adults, many of them, and you have a different set of considerations. So I guess that's kind of a two, like when we voted to approve the policy, I personally voted on it only contingent that this would be like a trial thing and we would be receiving some of that other information because those were legitimate questions, I think, and legitimate concerns that some people had. So do we feel like, based on how this rolled out at the middle school, the impact in the middle school, like, was there a significant benefit to discipline, I guess, how did it impact the office staff? I guess I'll start with those first two questions.
So there was a significant decrease in the number of students who were sent to the office or came to the office for discipline issues related to cell phones. We only actually had, I went and looked today, there were only 6 students that reached that 3rd tier of discipline in the policy. So as compared to 42 students in the first 2/3 of the year. So a very significant drop. And Mr. Mangalinks is here, and he's in the classrooms with the kids. I don't know if you have any commentary about changes that you saw after the pouches came.
It made a world of difference. I think there were still a lot of kids who were not putting their phones in the pouches, but it had the desired effect of didn't see them in class. And that's really what we were aiming for. So that they weren't walking in the halls with them. They weren't. I don't have knowledge of if they were doing shenanigans in the bathroom or whatnot with them, which they do, but there was no problems in my classroom or on my team, which is 8th grade. We had no problems with phones the rest of the year after young.
Yeah,
I saw a lot of empty pouches. But if the goal was to not have them out in class, I think.
Yeah, to Mark's point, and I know Fiona and I discussed this at one meeting. We certainly weren't going to conduct searches on students who were saying, and their parents were saying, my kid doesn't have a phone. We sent home a form. If you came in with that sign saying, my child does not bring their cell phone to school, we respected that the parent was not sending their kid to school with their phone. Did we search kids' backpacks to check? No, but certainly the kids, even the kids who came and said, I don't have a phone, had an empty pouch, never took their phones out. So it did solve the problems in the classroom. In terms of the hallways as well, it was not uncommon at all for an administrator to have to confiscate phones in the hallway because kids would walk down and have their phones out. And that went away. Were they being sneaky in bathrooms? I don't know. We don't stand in the bathrooms with them. So, but it did solve a lot of the problems that I think the policy was aimed to solve. In terms of some of the concerns that I know were around, the transition to the policy went far smoother than I think we had anticipated. First day, we had to iron out a lot of logistics issues. The first day, not so smooth, but by the second day, when we got those issues ironed out, it was a very smooth entry into the building. Maybe it took us 5-10 minutes longer to get the kids in the building. The exit was the same amount of time as the exit of the building had been before. And that was, of course, in part because of the board's agreement to support teachers and pay teachers for supervision during that time.
Yeah, that was a huge help.
Yeah.
That was just needed, and we'll need that, and we put that into the budget for this next year as well.
What was the impact on office staff?
That was some of the logistics that we had to iron out that first week. The first 2 days, the office staff became very overwhelmed. And then we worked out a new system with our new dean. And by the end of the week, we had it running pretty smooth. The dean was handling all phone calls in terms of violations of cell phone policy. And like I said, first few days, because our conversations with Yonder got a little confusing. So we were calling home in situations where the form ended up taking care of that problem for us, and we didn't have to call home for those ones. The first 2 days, our dean had to make over 60 phone calls a day. After that, when we got it ironed out, she was definitely making phone calls on a daily basis about a kid who forgot their pouch or forgot this or forgot that. But it went pretty smoothly.
I just want to add that was her first 2 days on the job.
That was her
She
first 2 days on the
started
job.
on Young's.
Yes.
Oh,
And she did
the
not
day
run
she
the
came
rails.
in, was not the day of implementation, so kudos to her. And she's staying, so I just wanted to point that out as you were talking about that. I'm like, that was her first day.
Yes, that was
I'm
her
just
first
gonna
day.
say that.
She made 66 parent phone
Yep.
calls on her first day.
So,
Oh,
just saying.
Hi, you
Thought
don't
that
know
was
me,
important
but-
to note.
So now she
Yeah.
thinks her job's a breeze.
Yes,
Yeah, right.
comparatively
All good.
speaking.
Yes, yes.
And I'm sorry, I
Yep,
just
nope.
have a lot of questions
Yeah.
about this. So as far as like the issue, because parents had concerns,
Yep.
my child has to contact me and I have to drop something off for my child, all those things. Did the office field a lot of contacts
No.
in that vein?
Our counseling department and our social workers and special education department, we tried to be as proactive as possible. And we checked in 504 plans and IEPs for those students who had language regarding their cell phones. We came up with a specific card that those students received, and Yonder provided us with Velcro pouches. So if a student did have a medical condition in which they needed access to their phone, that was able to be solved. So that took care of all of the medical part of it. In terms of the anxiety issues, we worked with the parents, and most of them were able to come to a compromise with us, where we did have the kids calling home, but rather than using their cell phone, they received a pass to go see their counselor or social worker, or in more rare cases, if that person wasn't available, they could just come to my office. And we just, dialed the parent, said, Johnny needs to talk to you, and put them on the phone, and that seemed to solve most of the problems.
So do we, and I'm not trying to put you
Yep.
on the spot. You went from middle school to high school, so I feel like you're the guy I need to
Yep.
ask, but that's not necessarily the case. So I guess, would we be looking at the high school to implement a form similar to what was implemented at the middle school, where the parents sign off and says, my child is not bringing in their phone to school?
Yeah, because it really does streamline the process. That was the big problem we ran into, because honestly, a lot of sixth graders just don't have phones. So we were stopping all of these sixth graders who were walking into the building, and they're trying to find these pouches, but where they don't have the phone in the pouch, they're like, in sixth graders to begin with, they're not the most organized people in the world. So everything's going to come out of the backpack on a table and get looked through, and then, I don't know where it is. Now we got to call home. And that was the 66 phone calls on the first day. So once we got that ironed out with the system of a parent saying, no, my student is not bringing their phone to school, then that really did streamline that process and take care of that issue for us. So I would think, even though it wouldn't be necessarily for the same reasons, because age was the big reason with our sixth graders why they didn't have phones, there may be other reasons that the families just say, I'm not comfortable with the system, my kid's keeping their phone at home, and that's perfectly fine. And we're going to trust the parents that if they're telling us they're not sending their kid to school with the phone, then we'll take their word for it
Until,
we find out otherwise.
right, and then there's consequences.
Yes.
So I wonder, so one more question about
Mhm.
instituting at the high school is, I know with the changing parking lot configuration and bus route and all that, how does that impact the drop off and pickup and the kiosks and all of that?
It'll actually make it a little bit easier. So we did relocate the entrance for the normal entry time of the day. It's closer to where the tech wing is at the back of the building.
Okay.
There's a breezeway there. We're getting security cameras installed. That's also where the yonder magnets will get installed. But because it is, unlike the middle school, one main entry area, that does minimize the amount of personnel we need in that area. Whereas at the middle school, we actually had 4 different entry points into the building, which meant we needed a lot more staff to cover those entry points, because it was really important to have an administrator at each one of those entry points in case the student, because we did anticipate initially that we would get a lot of students that gave us a hard time about it. Really, we didn't. So we still ended up shifting the administrators to where the large groups of students were gathering and having teachers in those locations, because the students really weren't putting up a big fuss about putting their phones in the pouches.
Thank you. So is there any concern about the amount of time that it's going to take for 900 some odd kids to put their phones in pouches and go through that small area and then go, because that building is just much more spread out than the middle
Yeah,
school?
with the
And kids
retractable,
not being to class on time and all
yeah,
that.
with the retractable pins, it won't be an issue. That was actually one of the things we were really happy to see at the middle school, different reason than at the high school. With the middle school, the kids are just, their eye-hand coordination isn't necessarily the best, and they were bending a lot of pins. But with the high school kids, we can actually, we'll do, town hall meetings with them to go over the policy. They can actually put their phone into the pouch on their own. They don't need the magnet to put their phone into the pouch, whereas the old pins, they had to unlock the pouch, put the phone in, lock the pouch. Now the pouch can remain unlocked because there's no danger of that pin bending. So when the student leaves at the end of the day on Monday, let's say, when they return back to school, they can just simply put the phone into the pouch before they walk into the
Much
building.
faster.
So it doesn't require the magnet to lock it.
Plus the eighth graders.
The eighth graders know how to do it. They're experts.
Exactly. They know. Exactly.
They'll be helpers.
So how does it lock then?
So it just pushes. And then once it goes through into the other part of the pouch, it locks. And the only way to unlock it is with the magnet, but the locking is no longer required. The reason why that we had to go through the process at the middle school is because if the pouch remained open, that pin stuck out. And there was the danger, of course, of kids poking themselves with the pin, but also what was happening is the kids were putting the pouch opened into their backpack. It was banging against notebooks or whatever and bending, and then the pouch didn't work anymore. So with the retractable pin, they can just leave it unlocked. They don't have to relock it afterwards.
Right. So it took longer as they were walking through, unlock, put it in, then go.
Yeah.
Okay,
Whereas the
but
pouch will already be unlocked now.
already unlocked, they
Yep.
put their phone in, does
And
it
lock it.
automatically lock?
Yep.
When they,
When they close it,
Close
it
it.
locks. Mhm.
oh, okay,
Yeah, it has a push button. And when they push the button, the pin
but they
goes
can
out
keep
and
it
locks.
unlocked then?
No, because you can visibly see when the student, the way the process works is every student, when they walk into the building, holds up their pouch.
Right.
Oh,
And
okay,
you can visibly see whether the pouch is locked or unlocked.
okay,
That's why we need the supervision at the entrances.
Yes.
right.
And we
right.
make them go slow enough so that we actually see.
And that was actually one of the nice things too about the Velcro pouches, because it didn't make students stand out who did need the Velcro pouches.
Right,
Like, and oddly enough, some of our program students actually really wanted the pouches, even some of them who didn't have phones, because they saw everybody else have pouches. So like our life skills kids, we gave them all Velcro pouches because they wanted to have what everybody else had.
course they
And
did.
so we did that for them. And, if they had a phone, it was one of those very parent controlled phones. They
But
couldn't do anything with
still
it
makes
anyway,
them,
but it made them
Right.
feel
Feel
like they were part of the
Yeah.
community.
Exactly.
And we even had teachers who asked for pouches, and we gave them Velcro pouches as well, so that the kids could see the teachers using the Velcro pouches.
Nice.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry, not sorry. And this question is actually not for you.
Okay.
Because you weren't at the high school last year. So I'm curious to know, because at the same time that the yonder pouches were instituted at the middle school, the new cell phone, more stringent cell phone policy was
Mhm.
instituted and implemented at the high school. And from my understanding, that put a big dent in the amount of cell phone related crimes and misdemeanors
Mhm.
that occurred from April to June. And so I guess I'm wondering, I don't know if we have the ability to quantify that today. Like, is going through this sea change at the high school now necessary if implementing that, like that mid-range policy was effective. I guess that's a question.
Sure. So I think they saw the same thing that they saw at the middle school, where teachers were very happy. They didn't have to worry about it. They had their gathering spot, and during class time, it was great. But kids were still able to, access them during the day.
Sure.
The thought is, and the philosophy from Yonder, as well as just trying to do implementation, it's kind of like the old teacher adage, don't smile till Christmas, right? So you want to start out strong. You want to make sure that everybody gets the same message, because you want to see if this works. And then maybe you consider in the spring senior privilege, or maybe it's only in the cafeteria for seniors, or I don't know. But I think right now we're still in the information gathering, the data gathering phase of it.
So that's something where if we did go with it the way that's being recommended, that halfway through the year, we could assess that at the high school and see. I mean, because I like Yonder generally speaking. I like it far less for older kids than I like it for younger kids, because I think that high schoolers, especially juniors and seniors, have a lot of very legitimate reasons that they may need to have contact with the outside world during the day, whether they're babysitting, they have ride issues for, actually freshmen and sophomores could have ride issues as well for sports and after school activities, things like that. And I don't think that we've really accounted for that. And that's not an issue that would have cropped up last year, because they would have made whatever necessary contacts they needed to at lunch when they were still permitted to have their phones. And so I do have a level of concern about that. I do also recognize all of the pros to it, but I think that maybe with the older kids, we need maybe to balance those priorities a little. So I would request, if we go forward with this at the high school, the way that's being recommended, that we reassess it after the holiday break maybe, and see if there are kids that this is legitimately causing an issue for, because I could see very real situations where it would.
Or things are going so well and you want to say, okay, for seniors that we allow blah, blah. I don't know,
Yeah.
but I think, yes, we certainly want to check in mid-year. Last year, we started at April 25th, and then
Right.
we had really 2 months. So we really didn't have a sustained time where we could have reported out on it. Thank you, Brian, for bringing the stats tonight.
I would suggest in January, we have a report from both middle and high school on how it's going.
Yep. In terms of just one thing, in terms of the contact about rides, I know sports was one of the concerns, practices being canceled, things like that. We did run into that at the middle school. That was one of those other logistics things that we had to iron out. But after the first slight miscue, where we were rushing to make phone calls at the end of the day, after that, we developed a system, and Mike Fritsch, who is heads the athletics at the school, was able to use a system that got out messages only to those parents that were impacted by some sort of cancellation or change. So it did work pretty well. It wasn't that we had to send a message to every family in the middle school. It only went to the track team or the baseball team.
Right.
Carry forward to.
Yep.
the high school.
And we'll
We
have
already
parents.
that
Right.
system. Yeah.
And we'll have Parent Square that Ally's gotten for us, and we're going to get trained, and I think coaches are going to be trained too, on how to use that, make it easier.
Training all the administrators. So Parent Square is a system which connects to Power School, but it can be very granular on a list that you set up, and it's capable of really catering to our community, whether it is through a text message, through email, through voice, anything that they prefer, we'll be able to send the messages. Even though there's an app for it, so it just becomes a pop-up on your phone. And depending on groups you have set up, the building and coach will be able to send messages.
Yeah, and then obviously, if we're just using the computers, then it'll be important to send those by email.
That's what I was gonna say.
But also doing, right, and
it'll-
then
it'll
you'll
send
also,
essentially every venue.
and I
possible.
think too, we learned that the announcements, just getting on and saying, please excuse the interruption, softball practice is canceled for today, old school, just making sure that everybody knows, right? Yeah, which is what we always did, right?
So
Anyone
Ally,
else
is that
have
app,
anything?
is it like an app on the
It's
MacBook?
no, so it's
What's it called?
well for the parents, it's an app for the phone called Parent Square. For the MacBooks for the students, I have a couple of ways of doing that. So we're not just doing Parent Square. There's also a thing we're doing called ClassLink. And ClassLink is like a single sign-on platform for students. It's like a one-stop shop for them to access their content. We are able to push notifications through ClassLink, where just on their page where they go to go into the app, all of a sudden there's a notification there saying, hey, this is what's happening today. It's great. So yeah, for the MacBooks or really any device that they have, the middle school doesn't have MacBooks, but we'll be able to use Chromebooks as well to push notifications.
I was one of the coaches in the spring, and it was a very rainy season for baseball. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
But we had all of our kids in middle school sports. They're in a Google Classroom for sport. So we announce every day. So we thought that would work. No. Then we had then our next step was we would tell the kids, email your parents. And then it was, but I don't check my email. So then all of us coaches did a group text with the parents. And then we did announcements with the parents. But to be fair, sometimes people are looking for a reason why something they don't like is bad. So I think you have to put part of that aside. Some people really got like, see, this is why this is stupid. And I think that's part of what we had, because we did a lot, like having it on Google Classroom every day should work. Having it on,
Email.
Yeah.
It only works when you look at it, right?
Yeah.
And what we really found out is, boy, there's a lot of parents that are very dependent on getting lots of communication from their child every day,
All day
During the
long.
day.
during the day.
With Parents Square, we'll get feedback electronically to where we'll be able to tell which parents receive and or not just receive but also read our communication. So we'll be able to see who's looking at us and who is
Good.
and then we'll be able to kind of go after the parents who are not looking at it and figure out why.
They don't have the option of opting out, read receipts.
They do. No, it doesn't work that way. The moment somebody clicks on something to read a message, have you ever heard of hidden pixels? It's a hidden image, really. It's just a blank pixel, which is used, social media uses it for tracking people. And we'll be able to kind of do the same thing when you click on a message. It shows that this little hidden pixel, this transparent image was retrieved by a specific person. It's catered just for their account. And the moment it gets, we get a message saying, hey, they have looked at it because that image has been retrieved, we know that they've looked at it.
And you will let the parents know that we can tell if you looked at your message or not? Because you'll get parents to say, oh, I never got that, I never looked at it, but then you go back and look, well, yeah, you did.
That's up for discussion, but we will be able to use that information to reach out and saying, hey, are you able to get our messages? And if not, what can we do to make it easier for you?
Yeah. Do it in
Because
a,
I think, right, but if they know that you can tell that they read it, they might be more, you might be better stewards of.
We'll have to see how it goes and then kind of go from there.
Or they just won't click.
Don't click on it.
that's a possibility.
Can't help you.
Yeah,
I had a couple elementary people reach out on page 2. They wanted to know if the board would be opposed to removing or desk for elementary and just leaving it out of view in the student's backpack, rather,
Oh.
because they have some that
Yeah,
would
I
put
don't know
them
why
on
we
the
didn't
desk.
do that. Yeah,
That came to me.
do they have?
they keep them in their backpack, so that's a good
Yeah.
catch.
Yeah,
They're not
yeah.
I
out
think,
on the
I think
desk.
it was originally written because when they have
In
those in
elementary
but I don't
school?
think we have those anymore.
In elementary school, they have desks that
No,
have, or they
They
open
used to have
nothing.
those.
So-
No.
So
That's what I'm saying, I think that was
So-
how it was
Okay.
mapped.
Right.
But they don't have that anymore.
So,
Well, it
so the
used to
request
be,
is, can we just get rid of or
Yeah.
desk?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Doesn't really
Okay.
change anything.
So for the middle school and the high school. They're not exactly the same. The exception is what's on this paper. It's what you're proposing to.
Right, so it would be everything that it says in the middle school, and then it would also
Plus.
say, right. Except that, as requested by a teacher, as necessary for a specific lesson.
With the approval of the administrator.
Correct, all of that, that's written there. Yep,
You're gonna copy
So
the
you have a
exact language
process
of the middle
in-
school. Maybe this
This
first
one.
Yep,
sentence should
that's okay.
say,
So you have
cell
a
phone use
process
will
in
only
place
be
then.
allowed as requested. If you're gonna follow exactly how it's written in
Mhm.
middle school, I don't know if you like that.
Mhm.
Just a thought.
So you have a process in place whereas a teacher can request a mobile kiosk.
Yep.
They sign up for it.
Mhm.
And then do they also sign that they returned it?
They'll just come in the
You'll keep that in a notebook.
the additional mobile kiosks will be kept in the principal secretary's office. And there'll be a book there for people, once they have approval, to sign up which one they're taking, so that we know which one went to which teacher. But they'll only be able to sign it out if they've received approval.
Okay, what if 3 teachers want it?
We got a bunch of them, so
Okay.
we should be all set.
all set,
And they
okay.
did say that if we ran into any sort of situation where we needed additional mobile kiosks, they could get them to us in a very short order.
And who has only the principal can give a kiosk, like give a mobile
We-
kiosk to someone?
Put it down as administrator approval in case of situations where I'm unavailable, or if it's something that's specific to a department that one of the assistant principals work with, it might make more sense for them to speak to that assistant principal. Because we have, like, for example, Andrew works with the folks in the career pathways. If something came up having to do with one of the pathways that they really needed the kids to have access to the phone, it would make more sense because he would have greater knowledge of the situation.
And so you have like if everyone is out or spreading everywhere else, but someone needs it, do you know what I
Yep.
mean?
Mhm.
You have a plan?
Yep.
Okay, that's all. I don't need to know the plan. Kim,
No, I just said to Sue, I said, if you're reading how it flows, right, like, so it says for update the THS similar to TMS with one exception. So if you read the actual verbiage of the Torrington Middle School policy and how it reads, I think the first part of this second paragraph that adds for THS should actually say cell phone use will only be allowed as requested. Because really you're outlining in the first paragraph, if you read how it reads in the Torrington Middle School, right?
yeah,
cell phone use.
Right,
will
yeah, or we could
only-
even just say cell phones will only be allowed
right.
if requested
Exactly.
by, yep. I think that
Yeah.
keeps the verbiage consistent.
So cell phones will only be allowed
If,
if requested by a teacher
yep,
as necessary for a specific lesson.
And the rest I think is fine.
Yep.
That just lines up better with how that whole first paragraph reads.
Well, instead of another sentence, just upon approval by an administrator 24 hours in advance. Or does it need to be another whole sentence?
okay, to add it to that first sentence.
Right, because then
Yeah.
you're reading, someone's reading
Right.
one whole sentence rather than just reading the first part and saying, okay,
Yep,
and not,
yeah, no, that's easier, sure. Specific lesson, take out the period, upon approval by an administrator 24 hours in advance. Yeah, I think that's fine.
Just one. So now we have the field trip permission form. Could we do a mobile kiosk permission form,
Yeah, you
only
certainly
because
could.
I think the habits are harder to break.
Yep.
And I would also like something saying, yes, every student in my class has access to a phone.
Mhm.
Because I still have just concerns about the public school system
Mhm.
requiring kids to have a phone for
Yep.
curriculum.
Yep, we can certainly get a form put together.
I mean, that would be a procedural thing, but I think it would make it cleaner.
Mhm.
And people running in to you guys saying, I'd like to do this,
Mhm.
is much easier than filling out a form of
Yep.
why you need an OBPS.
Yep.
Right. So we'll just make sure there's a confirmation that all students have access to a cell
I just
phone
think
for
to
that
protect
lesson.
us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, and it's what's right anyway.
right.
Well, that's what you said, Fiona, just made me remember, like, we had talked about this. If there's a class that like drones,
Mhm.
that where you really need a cell phone to take this class, then that wouldn't just be, a teacher's not gonna request it every single day, right? For every 24 hours in advance for every day for the entire semester. It would have to be, we shouldn't be requiring phones.
Right.
For someone to take a class. So will we have classroom sets of cell phones? For a class that was going to like the majority of the curriculum, they need the phone.
My understanding is that we have devices that could be used in place of that. So if a student is signing up for drones, they would be able to use, for an example, an iPad that would have the same capacity. It's just a matter of, having them for every kid who would ever want to take the class, I think is where part of the problem might lie. But we would be able to provide a student with a device to take a class so that they would not be required to use their phone.
And then we'll have to figure out, the drone class is probably the most difficult
Yes.
one. So we have to figure out how many days a week would they need it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's only one, once every 2 weeks. I don't know. I think we have to clarify that. But that's our stickiest one. I think the majority of our classes, it's just going to be, oh, this is this specific lesson and I've got to have this.
Mhm.
I've got to have my students have access.
So just a phone, so just this point, would it make sense for us to buy a set of phones for the drone class that are a classroom set?
I have no idea what the cost
Yeah, Ally
associated
will
with that
have
be,
a-
so I'd have to
yeah.
pass that one down.
So I don't think doing the phones would be cost efficient because the phones have so many more features than that the class doesn't really need. I think doing iPads would be the most cost efficient way to do that. And we can look into getting a class set.
That'd be great. And then they just stay there.
They stay there. And
Yeah.
it'll make things easier for the teacher too, because on the phones, these drones operate through Bluetooth. And so you bring in a personal phone, you'd have to download the software, you'd have to pair the device, then maybe they come in the next day, then they switch out the drones with another another classmate, but then their phone is already paired to the wrong one. It's just that if we have class
Yeah.
sets, I think it's gonna be much easier.
Yikes.
And it can be done, pretty inexpensively.
When did you have a question?
Somewhat answered. It kind of relates to this notification 24 hours in advance. You addressed one of the concerns I had, like not every student is gonna have a phone because of the district that we're in. And we're requiring phones to take this class. Now, for the forms that are signed where my kid doesn't take a phone to school, we don't know what percentage of that's gonna be in high school. Teachers are requesting something 24 hours in advance. How are we letting the kids know?
Right,
And-
so when a teacher does a lesson plan, you do a lesson plan at least a week in advance. And so they can, especially in this case now, they're gonna have to notify the kids or check in with them. How many of you have cell phones, how many of you don't, that kind of thing. My guess is if I have that type of class, I'm gonna ask that of my students in the first week of school. So I have a sense. And then if some other students come in, then I'll update my roster. But I think that's something that isn't planned for well in advance. So should that come up, you've already gotten ready to address it. It's just part of good planning.
Anyone else?
I mean, so one other thing came to mind, because I remember us kind of having some of these same conversations before, and it's okay to have them again because these are complicated and they're large impact questions and issues. But there are times when a parent and child need to have a back and forth communication. It's not enough to get a mass email from a parent square, or even like, because like I'm pretty well versed in Google Classroom, and I like it. Yeah, like a parent could join. If you have a baseball classroom, a parent could join your baseball classroom and they would receive the same messages. But like, if a parent, your freshman theater kid finds out that things got canceled and they don't know, they have to notify the parents, okay, you're going to Johnny's house afterwards instead of this other place. Like, there are times where there would have just been this back and forth. Oh, hey, I don't have theater today. Oh, well, you should, you can't come home because I'm not going to be home. You got to do X, Y, Z. And there's like a back and forth dialogue. It's not as simple as a parent just receiving information. So I don't know how often that issue will come up, but those would be the situations where the kid has to get a pass to go to the office and calls mom, mom's not there, you gotta wait, mom calls back. Like, I mean, it can just be kind of a mess. And so when we do look at this in a few months into the year, maybe those are the type of things I'd like to know how often things like that happen, because I mean, it's the first year that I've been on the board that I don't have a kid in the school system, but I totally like that. I've seen that type of thing happen a million times, and it's going to continue to happen, even though my kid and her peer group aren't there, because this is just how people operate and how things, so that's just something else that I think we're going to want to look out for.
And we can gather that data. I just wanted to say, I think Logan in our group, when we had discussed, or maybe he told me this later, he said that some of his teachers had worked out a really good system for that, even with, it must have been afterward because we met before,
Yeah.
where kids, if they had to call the parent, they just said to the teacher, at the end of class, or if it was a real emergency, got a call. We have phones in every single classroom. The kid just, went outside the door and said, okay, mom, dad, whatever, this is the situation. And they didn't even have to wait to go to the office, and they worked out whatever they needed to work out. And it was pretty seamless. They were really, they got to address their concerns right then in that period. And it wasn't a big deal. They didn't even go down to the office. I think in the middle school, it's different. The kids are younger and they may be doing it for anxiety. In the high school, it's like, I just got a call to say this one thing, and I don't know what's going on because mom can't, and dad can't, and I'm not sure if grandma can. So I got to figure out whatever. So I got to literally talk to somebody. So I think there was a lot of flexibility at the high school, even in the short time that we did it from April to June. So I think we will have some good information about that and how we've worked it out.
Yeah. And if something like that proves to be a classroom disruption, or if it isn't,
Yeah.
like, because I can see it going either way.
Right.
Good.
My thought is be proactive. When something goes out for the yonder couches or whatever, just something in there, like, I don't know, have a backup plan with your child in case, something is canceled or whatever. I mean, just
Yeah,
just
plan
a little
B.
blurb or something, you know what I mean, to kind of catch something.
That's what I'm struggling to understand as a parent, why you wouldn't just say to your child that practice is canceled this week, either take the bus or come straight home.
Right.
And then if something is an emergency, then you would call the school to say that they can't come home. I mean, I've been a big part of this, but we're 42% proficient again. And I think a lot of this is because of all of this back and forth and distractions and not focusing on school. So I think just as a board, our focus needs to be on helping these kids to be successful because they're not working out.
And I
And
also,
parents need to be able to.
well, I think we also need to retrain some of our parents. I think sometimes parents reach out to kids more than the kids are reaching out to the parents. So I think it's a learning curve for everybody.
We read the stuff on, Torrington chatter and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And,
Nice.
it was like reading like a combination of War and Peace. and the Addams Family stuff or something. And you know what, the honesty, like the parents were more upset
Yeah.
than the kids.
Yes.
The kids were generally
Yeah.
the sucks butt.
Yeah.
And they got over it. You know, the parents were still on Facebook about it, and that's just noise. And the kids were generally pretty good about it. The ones who weren't, a lot of stuff. You know, generally the kids would put their phones away and we wouldn't hear them for the day, and that was the goal. And I think we achieved it.
And I think school staff, whether it's the teachers, the administrators, if there's an emergency and a phone call goes to the office, it's going to be handled quickly and immediately. And in some cases, maybe not with the kids, before the kids could read it on their phones. You know, so.
Anything else?
Are we going to the next section E?
Yep. Just to clarify, and if you want to talk a little bit about the offenses and how many students at each offense, it doesn't have to be a perfect number, but you have some sense. We go to page 3. We need to clarify now, having lived
Yeah.
the offenses, because we saw, and I'm just going to summarize, and then Brent's going to jump in with details. Those upper offenses, the 4th and the 5th offense, really became defiance, really became those, struggle type situations. So it became a different issue. It wasn't about a cell phone policy anymore. It was really
Right.
about, okay, we deal with this on a different level. So you want to talk about 1, 2, and 3? Because
Sure. So 1 was a little hard to track because of the issue that I mentioned before about kids who did not have phones, and technically not having a pouch if you don't have a phone was a violation. So we were tracking that, but that's an overwhelming number because you had to remember a 6th grader who didn't have a phone and lost his pouch came to school every day for the remainder of the year and technically was in violation of step 1 of the policy. We obviously weren't going to start suspending kids who didn't have phones for not having pouches. That would be insanity.
right, but if they had it out,
Right.
this really what
Yep.
this was for in terms of the first
So
offense and the response.
In terms of the 2nd and 3rd offenses, so there were 64 students that reached the 2nd violation.
Sorry, out of how many?
1,100. And then for 3rd violation, so we have 2 different numbers. It's either 19 or 13. Let's see, they're gonna figure out why. 2 different numbers. Oh, it was 19 violations for number 3.
Brian, are those individual kids or
Yep.
repeat
Mhm.
offenders? So
No, because if they were repeat,
I know which one you're
Yeah.
talking
if they were
about.
repeat, they would have moved to the next level.
Okay.
So if a student reached number 3, violated the policy again, they went to number 4.
Thank you.
And as I said, we only had 6 students that actually reached the point of receiving an in-school suspension. With the students that did reach that level, those are students who were frequently in the office for other disciplinary or behavioral issues. So that was where we felt that this was really just another demonstration of a pattern of behavior for them, and makes more sense to be part of an overall behavioral discipline system, because it wasn't just I brought my cell phone and didn't put it in my pouch 4 times, but I never did anything else. You know, as Mark said, the students who were difficult about this are students that were difficult about lots of things. So.
Question about the second paragraph. Do we have classroom collection areas? That would go
Oh, so
away,
then that
right?
would go away,
away,
yes.
right.
Good catch.
So follow directives. So, okay, so when your students violate board and school rules related to the use of cell phones, including that to refusing to utilize district issued cell phone passwords, follow directives.
Or would you take
Will
that
receive.
Or
out and
relinquish
say,
their
right,
cell phones to the administration will receive
mhm,
appropriate disciplinary consequences. Does that make sense?
Or do you even need that? Because there's something.
yeah, that's what I'm
You don't need
wondering
that, I
too.
don't think.
Not at that point,
Because it would
right?
just be to utilize district issued cell phone pouches will receive appropriate disciplinary consequences.
Right.
Because
I
the
took
first-
that as failing to relinquish their, like, so if in the first offense, they don't turn over their
Right,
cell
that's
phone.
right,
Mhm.
that's
So
the
that's
first
why-
offense,
Right.
yeah.
So that's when I felt like that was a reference to, because if you don't follow the one, then you go to.
So it's actually students that violate the rules related to use of cell phones will receive appropriate
Right,
disciplinary consequences according to the tier.
So you're taking out included but not limited to,
Right. Does that make more sense?
because they have to use the pouches, right? Because we'll receive disciplinary consequences.
But isn't that a policy?
well, shouldn't that be,
or-
shouldn't it be
So
cell
it
phone
says-
pouches? Students about it.
But could you reference the beginning, which is our policy that says they have to use pouches? So this is our policy. If you bring it to school, it must be.
Right.
So then you would keep that phrase, including but not limited to refusing to utilize district issued cell phone pouches, and take out follow directives to place their cell phones all the way to the comma before will. Right? And then-
You say violate section B of this policy.
Right.
And,
Yeah, you don't need to put any examples.
right, 'cause then they just go back. and what's the-
So students that
I mean, I
violate
know that
section B of this contract, of this
Okay, so
policy.
then, okay, so let's, what's the
I think that would
verbiage
cover
again? Because then we could take out the
your-
rest of this, right?
Right, section B of this policy.
But then if they didn't have a phone.
Right. Students that violate section B of this policy.
Is high school its own section? Yeah. So B and C, B or C. They're both on the.
They're both under B.
Okay,
Will receive appropriate disciplinary consequences according to the tiers of discipline for cell phone violations as follows.
mhm.
Because then it could also apply to elementary.
What can that be in the first paragraph? Last sentence of the first paragraph,
Or could you just add that sentence?
add it
To the
with the
first
first
paragraph.
paragraph.
Of the policy, the very
Of-
first
of-
paragraph?
No,
under
of section
disciplinary
B,
action.
Yeah,
the last sentence in the first paragraph. A violation
and
of
then
this
just add
policy
that. I think that's better.
add the section B. In addition, well, students that violate section B of this policy will receive,
Appropriate disciplinary consequences.
right,
Right.
Yep,
right. So you
Yeah,
get rid
that
of
cleans
that
it up.
paragraph
That
and
one.
Yep.
then bring it into,
this other one, the first
Right.
paragraph.
right. Okay, so what are you suggesting for violations 1, 2, through 6?
So one is still going to be that we take the cell phone that very first time, students get it back at the end of the day. Second offense is the parent has to come pick it up.
Yeah.
And we were gonna add that they needed to, are we gonna say that they needed to do that by the end of the day, or that's just gonna be something that you share? Okay, at your site. And then the third offense, the students will receive a 1-day in-school suspension and the phone will be retrieved by the parent or guardian. Sometimes the parent said, I'll
Oh,
pick it
yeah.
up whenever.
Right,
I'll get back to you.
Keep it for the
Right.
weekend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
so you want to get rid of 4 and 5?
Brian said he still has one.
Jesus.
Sitting in the hall.
So yeah, the proposal to get rid of 4 and 5,
Eliminate 4
Where-
and 5.
yep, and then,
Just go to 6.
right, and
Would be
then the
4.
accumulation. And I don't, some of this will include out-of-school suspension. So there we say may lead to possible expulsion because we gave the most extreme.
Mhm.
But I don't know if you want any verbiage in there that mentions out-of-school suspension there as well.
I think you should have a school suspension or so.
Okay, so we'll put
Right.
both.
Right, out of school suspension
Yep.
or expulsion.
Or may lead to an out-of-school suspension or possible expulsion.
Okay,
Why do we feel the
Right.
need to modify 4, 5, and 6 if we never reached 4, 5, and 6?
because now we're gonna have the high school.
Right.
Too many steps.
Too many steps
Too
to
many
get to that
steps.
last step.
Because with number, it would be 4, you could incorporate.
Right.
4 and 5.
Mhm.
So you could
So
decide.
it's the-
Simplify.
My only point where I'm going with this is now it's gonna lead to an argument because it's gonna be open to the discretion of an administrator to make that decision. Johnny's gonna get 1 day, Sally gets 5 days, and then it's gonna be an argument, why did this happen?
Well, they
Here
won't
it's
know.
clearly defined.
They won't know. Like parent A won't know what the consequence was for parent B.
You don't think parents talk?
I don't, no, not all parents. I
But
mean,
you-
certainly, but the other part of it is student A may
Have a different
have
record.
a whole
Right.
different record
Right.
than student B. So accumulation of disciplinary actions.
So
So
discipline
it's-
is
so it's
totally different.
disciplinary action, not just based upon cell phone, but overall.
That's what it says, yeah, right there, yeah,
Including
including
those
those,
related to cell phones,
the last one, number 4.
which is now.
And some things do need to be left up to the discretion of the administrator.
Right, because they know
That's
the
why they're
history of
there.
the student, right?
That's their job. Well, number 6 will become number 4.
Right.
Right.
So you have 1, 2, 3, and then taking out 4 and 5 and making 6 number 4.
The bottom where the 2 asterisks. are. Can that be incorporated in the first paragraph? With documentation of the phone call, email, or text notification to the parent guardian. So it's not like an afterthought, it's
Yep.
part of the process.
Yeah, and maybe put that at the, in that first paragraph in section E. Sure.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yep. And that would become,
But documentation of a phone call, email, or text notification to the parent guardian regarding each infraction. There will be.
yeah, should be,
you turn it around.
Yeah.
Each infraction will be documented.
Okay, yeah,
By a,
by
yeah,
phone call, email, or text to the
Parents will
parent
be
or
notified,
guardian,
yeah.
right?
Text.
But put that up in the first paragraph where disciplinary action is.
Okay.
That makes sense?
mhm,
I mean, are we documenting this more or differently than we do other behavioral?
We were
Issues?
documenting it separate, almost double documenting it right now for the purpose of keeping track of how the policy was going. But no, moving forward, all discipline is documented, all parents are notified when violations happen. So it does fall back into sort of the normal procedures of the building. We had been double tracking it right now, just so it would be a little bit easier to be able to talk about how it went at the middle school once implemented, so that we could say, you know, these were the number of students who did first offense, second offense, third offense.
So if the normal procedure is to document
Right,
the point of
point of
contact, I'm not sure we need to say it. If it makes us feel like if it, for clarity's sake, we want to say, you know, parents will be notified of any disciplinary infraction or something. I mean, we can, if so, if you want the reader to know that though, if my child does this, someone will tell me, you know.
right.
But-
But we don't have to worry about the documentation
I don't think
portion
so.
of that.
Not if, I mean, we should, that's more like procedural.
Okay, so we could say the parent guardian will be notified by phone call, email, or text notification of
Of
each
violation.
infraction.
Yeah.
Yeah, for any violation.
So then on your paper you handed out.
Yep.
The last little sentence,
Mhm.
did you want that to replace number 4?
Yeah, so that would
I mean,
become number,
six,
That would be
yes.
number 4.
So, and then just with the verbiage that was added from input, so it would read, an accumulation of disciplinary infractions included those related to cell phone misuse and defiance may lead to an out-of-school suspension or possible expulsion if chronic noncompliance is evident. And that should be including, which I did
Right.
right on
You
this
did
one,
right
not
on
on
this
this
one,
one,
right.
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, 2 different documents.
Do you need a chronic non-compliance is evident?
I think so, because I think that will help us if we go to expulsion. I think we just have to cover ourselves there.
Yeah. Anything else? Then it's recommended that we send this to the full board with the changes as discussed.
Okay, and we'll, Marissa and I will work on that, right, Marissa?
That's for the good of the order. Great.
It's hard work.
I don't share Mrs. Creedon's opinion. We spent a lot of time watching angels dance on the head of a pin.
Angels are very important, John. I'm good.
Good, thank you very much.
Marissa?
Thank you, Brian, and Michael, for your input. Helpful to see what's actually happening.
I will echo that. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
So much pressure.
8